Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, but really still in Jerusalem now, in Israel, Highland Park, New Jersey. Highland Park Conservative Temple, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Day School, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski on Sheikh Chesed. It's great to see you guys. We can do this by being so far away. We have the name to announce, Amalia Yona, my granddaughter's name. This was a beautiful event that took place on Sunday. We named this little precious little teeny thing. She's very, very cute. And we're very, very excited about that. And I'll be coming back soon. Been away for a while. And this week we are reading Parashat Beha'alotkh. You know, in Israel, they read Beha'alotkh last week. So I got a redo. This week in Israel, it's Parashat Shlach, and so we're going to be out of sync with our Israeli brothers and sisters. But back to Beha'alotkh. Beha'alotkh starts by picking up on it's kind of the postscript of last week's parsha, the lighting of the menorah, and we have some material at the beginning of this parsha dealing with the ordination of the priests, the Levites. Kachet ha-Leviim, take the Levites, consecrate them to me. I always like the idea that the Levites are the replacements for the firstborn, and the way that they are consecrated is through the tnufa, hinafta otam tnufa. You have to wave the Levites. That's a very interesting thing. We have this idea that there are people that are not able to make Passover at the time, and so they get an opportunity to do it the following month, Pesach Sheni. That a series of laws pertaining to the people who are impure or away, and then some descriptions of the way that the people move in the desert. It's rather poetic. Al pi Adonai yachanu, al pi Adonai yisau, that the cloud lifts from the sanctuary, and the people move forward, and they move forward at God's will. All of that is what's taking place at the beginning of the parsha, and then we have an account of the trumpets, the silver trumpets that are made, and they are announcing. They function in a way to accompany the sacrifices and also move the people. And we have what all synagogue people understand. The verses that accompany the opening of the ark and the return of the Torah to the ark, separated by two upside down nuns. These are very interesting little diacritical marks in the Torah. Vayihi binso Aaron vayomer Moshe. We know that Huma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha, and uvnucho yomar. And when they settled down the ark, Shuv Adonai revavot alfei Yisrael, that God returned, and God the myriads of the thousands of Israel. And then, of course, we get into the real meat of the parsha.
So it's not real meat; it's quail. Please.
Quail. But let's talk for a second about the first verse in that chapter, which is Vayihi ha'am ke'mit onanim ra bo'oznei Adonai. The people were complaining. They complained. They were ra bo'oznei Adonai. Bad. And we have seen Bnei Yisrael complain before. Are we reaching a moment here where the volume of their complaints is just increasing? Are we reaching a moment where the content of their complaint is different? Are we reaching a moment of deeper frustration in Moses? And just if you were to kind of take your barometer and measure the temperature of the tension here, what's going on, and where are we with this, and how are the people really behaving, and why is it that they always seem to be complaining. Is that just something about the nature of
Jews.
this people, or
Jews.
Jews? All right, well, talk
They
about
were
it.
thinking about the future.
And so they romanticize the past.
So you ask a lot of good questions, Elliot, and part of it depends on what we actually think the book is. So the episode that we're going to read about with the quail has a parallel in Sefer Shmot. And when you were talking about the lighting of the menorah in the Mishkan, it occurred to me that in Sefer B'Midbar, the Mishkan, the Ohel Moed, the tabernacle, is a safe haven where everything works. People are commanded to do something, and they do it. In Sefer Vayikra, the great story, the two stories that are actually in the book, one of them is a disaster that takes place in the Ohel Moed. It's not a safe place where, even though everything is built around it, danger lurks and then erupts in the flame. Here in Beha'alotkh, the flame is a controlled flame. It's one that the Kohanim will light. You know, we sometimes forget that the purpose of lighting this menorah is to shed light. I wanted to suggest a nice tie-in. There's a rabbinic comment that the two inverted nuns make Sefer B'Midbar actually 3 books of the Torah. So if we follow that, we have 7 books of the Torah, one for each branch of the menorah, so that the lighting of the menorah is equivalent to our study of Torah.
Interesting,
And
very nice.
That's very lovely. You know, the one thing that you can always be counted on, one thing that can always be counted on in the Torah is when the people romanticize Egypt, something bad happens. You know, this is a book about liberation from Egypt, you know, heading to Sinai, heading towards the promised land. And I think that you know, this complaint is so terrible because they said, you know, man, we remember Zachar, you know, Vayomu mi yachilenu basar. What about the food? Zacharnu et hadaga asher nochal Mitzrayim chinam. We remember there's like all you have to do is stick your basket down into the Nile, and you were coming out with great fish for free. Et hakshuim, et avatichim, et hachatzir, et absalim, et hashumim, all these aromatic, you know, onion type vegetables, leeks and onions and garlic and melons and cucumbers. And now we have nothing but this, not this nafshenu yivesha, our souls are dried out. En kol bilti el haman einenu. We have nothing to look at except this wretched manna. I can't stand this old being taken care of God thing. What happened to you know, all the good food in Egypt? And I think that just, you know, it's like the kid who says to the parents, I wish I was never born. You know, they're on this great spiritual path from Egyptian slavery towards to receive the Torah and to implement it as part of living in society in the land of Israel, and they want to go back to be slaves again because the food was good.
Yeah, you know, I that expression nafshenu yevesha. So I looked up the Everett Fox translation. He says it's our throats are dry, and of course, you know, that would be the precise you know, interpretation. Nefesh, you know, higia mayim ad nafesh. That the word nefesh seems to be, you know, the throat. Our throats are dry, and you read the list of all the things that they miss. They're all kind of like, you know, water,
Yeah,
cruciferous kinds of thing, avatia, you know, and watermelons, you know, water rich, you know, fruits and vegetables. And there seems to be not only that sense of, you know, we're thirsty, we're parched, but we're also like, we're just empty. We're just done. We're done with
so
this.
what slavery had many tragedies, but one of them is that it crippled their sense of gratitude. Right? The manna is there for the taking, not unlike the fish that you described in the basket in the Nile, because it comes every day and a double portion on Friday. But that's not good enough. Right? It's not like they're hungry, it's they don't like the food. But they do absolutely nothing for the food. The food is delivered to them. You know, they're acting like little kids.
Well, let me ask you this question. Just, you know,
Right.
is gratitude, can you educate gratitude? Can you,
Absolutely. That's the whole purpose of religion, I've thought for many years, is to teach the attitude of gratitude.
okay,
And it we have to learn how to say thank you and to show appreciation for what we have. It's not something that we're born with. And when we think back, as you will come to know again, and as your granddaughter grows, that it does take an education to get that across, because little kids do not know how to behave. They have to be taught. And we all have had experiences, hopefully not with our own kids, of being with kids that have been improperly educated. And they're not a lot of fun to be around.
so I have a kind of idyllic picture of this people, because you know I'm back at the Exodus, and I have this interpretation I'm very committed to, which is that the night of the Exodus they did everything that they were supposed to do, and that they for one moment they were grateful, and that the moment doesn't last long, and here we are again, and here we are again, and it's just going to keep going like this. You know, is there any program to teach this, to teach gratitude? And you're saying basically that the core of the religious experience ought to be,
Well, the rabbis had a program. It was Rabbi Meir, I think, who said you have to say 100 brachot, 100 blessings every day. 100 times a day, you have to thank God. It doesn't matter actually if you thank God, but you have to thank someone for all the things that we take for granted, like opening our eyes in the morning,
okay,
getting dressed, taking a few steps. Those are all things that demand a blessing, an act of gratitude. And
So
you know,
you
it's
think
interesting. We've talked a little bit about this. There are two parshiot in the Chukotai and in Kitavo, where we have a lengthy list of curses. The blessings are much shorter because people naturally can tell you everything that went wrong that day.
mhm.
But we've had the experience. You ask your kid how school was, fine. It's a one-word answer. Something bad happened, it takes an hour for them to tell you.
Sure, sure, sure.
Well, Barry, I love what you're saying here about um, the the educative function of religious practice and ritual. So I think that's quite right. I mean, I'm not 1,000% sure that, you know, the affective dimension. I'm sure the affective dimension is not absent. You know, is like it's not totally missing from education, but it is easier to tell people what to do than to tell people um, uh, how to feel. I do think you can educate people's hearts. If I didn't think that, we'd all be in a lot of trouble. Um, but I do think that the whole point is to educate people's hearts to feel that. I agree with you, that sense of gratitude, that sense of wonder. But I just want to return for a second to the immediate problem that they're facing in this passage, which is that the journey's long, the journey's hard. They have not yet even received the 40-year punishment. Um, uh, they haven't received the 40-year punishment of dying in the desert. But the point is that even if, let's assume that they said brachas, let's assume that they said 100 brachas in a day. Let's assume they daven shacharit and did all those things. But it was.
But did they say the second Yukum work?
They said the second you can pork on, but they still thought back to the in its own way the kind of pampered affluent quality of being on the bottom of the pyramid of a wealthy society. Like, I think this is it's interesting question about, okay, because, you know, point of fact, Egypt, the Nile Delta, fertile area. Man, it doesn't get any better than that. They must have had awesome cantaloupe. And now they're in the Sinai Desert. Ain't cantaloupe.
Let's
So
go back to the verse for a second. And it says, "Ka mitonanim." Mitonomim. They were like complainers because they're complaining like they used to do in Egypt. Because slaves complain a lot because they have a very hard life. It's very hard for a slave to have appreciation of thankfulness, I would think. And even though they've been out of Egypt a year, they're still living as if they're still in Egypt because it takes a long time to get that out of them. And they haven't been tested yet. That will come next week in Shalach. But they cannot, when you look at their complaint, it doesn't quite register. Why are they really complaining? Have they been led astray? No, they're on the path.
Does it take a long time for Moses to recognize this? Because Moses in this particular story is frustrated, is completely frustrated. Look what he says. He says, I can't carry this people by myself. Before, and he's saying, did Anochi hariti et kol ha'am hazeh? Did I, gestate this people? Imanochi yiladatihu. Did I give birth to this people? Kitomar elai sa'il b'chakecha. That it should be said to me, you would say to me, carry this people in your, on you. Kasher yisah ha'omenet hayonek, as a mother suckles a child. He's using this very, very audacious imagery of him as the person who's birthed this people, and you get the sense that Moses has to learn something also about being the leader.
So the female imagery is striking. So what Moses is saying on one level is that he's not the mother. The question, does he see himself as the father or perhaps the stepfather? Someone disconnected from the people. And that heightens his frustration. Because if we think back to Exodus, this is not the job he signed up for. It was thrust upon him. He wanted to do something else with his life.
Well, he given this mission that he's going to take the people and bring them into the land. That's how it's supposed to work.
He also has difficulty with gratitude, but he has a terribly difficult job. As you could well appreciate, I imagine he's the parent of the kid that's crying on the transatlantic flight. Right? Everyone else is upset, but if you're the parent, what are you supposed to do? You can't leave. You have to kind of grin and bear it.
Well, will somebody please pick up their kid?
You swaddle the child, you feed the child, and that's it. There's a sense of helplessness that here the child, the people are helpless, they're infantile, and he doesn't have the capacity to provide for them in the way that they need. It's just what it is.
Can I just to tell you something spectacular here, based on my vast and incalculable Torah knowledge and the great resources at my fingertips of Google, Google. I discovered that there's of course, people ask this question: what bracha did they say on the manna? And different people said different things. There's a medieval report. Let me pull this one up. There's a medieval report here that they have in the name of Yehuda HaChassid, Hanoten lechem min hashamayim, because you remember it says back in Exodus, Hineni mamtir lachem lechem min hashamayim. So they didn't say
they can't say Hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Can't say Hamotzi lechem min haaretz because it didn't come from the haaretz. It came from the shamayim. And there's a view of a Kabbalist called Menachem Azaria Defano who said that in the future we will say the bracha Hamotzi lechem min hashamayim. That's pretty cool.
All right, so close your eyes and just meditate on that one for a second, which is, what's he really saying here?
Well, I think what he's saying is that we will be sustained by a miracle. And I think one of the difficulties that we have today is that we don't appreciate miracles. So when I was much younger, I read a lot of Martin Buber. And one of the points that Buber makes is that a miracle is not a supernatural event, it's the people's interpretation of the event.
Mm.
And because he was a naturalist. And that's always stayed with me, because lots of times we experience miracles, but we don't frame them as a miracle. And the example I always give with my students, which is now quite dated, the 6-Day War, people who lived through it, the Jews experienced it as a miracle. That was not the report in the New York Times, though.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They gave a rational explanation for why Israel was able to defeat its neighboring countries. But I think if you talk to people who are alive, they would say it was a miracle. They might not attribute it to God, secular people perhaps, but people understood that something great had happened that they had witnessed and lived through.
We then go into this passage where God wants to lighten the burden for Moses and tells him to gather up 70 men to kind of lead the people with him. Just take me into this passage here where God says, Esfali shivim ish miziknei Yisrael asher yadata. Gather 70 people, 70 men from the people of Israel that you know. I just lost the passage here. Ziknei ha'am v'shotrav. And then what happens then is that they vayasof shivim ish miziknei ha'am vayamed otam sivot ha'ohel. He gathers them up and puts them around the tent. Vayered Adonai be'anan. God comes down in the cloud, Vaydaber elav, and God speaks to Moses, Vayatzel min haruach asher alav, and something happens to the spirit that is with him. The spirit gets shared, Vayiten al shivim ish hazkinim, and it is distributed to the 70 people. Vayigenoach alehem haruach, as that spirit settles on them, Vayitnabu v'lo yasafu. They start to prophesy and they don't stop. It's an amazing moment where all of a sudden it's in the attempt to help Moses out, everybody gets as it were a piece of the divine spirit, and Moses doesn't seem to be bothered by that. I think that's the remarkable part about this is that here the divine spirit and the power that is invested in that is something that Moses delights in, and delights in having everybody that cohort, the leadership have. That's a unique quality in his own leadership, would you not say? And then, of course, we have the very next scene where it's going out of hand. Two of the people, Eldad and Medad, are prophesying in the community. Joshua is dispatched to see all this, and he comes back to Moses and says, these people are prophesying, and Moses' reaction:
Lock them up.
This
is where it first came from.
Lock them up. So what is Moses' reaction, Barry? And talk to us about that.
So he says, would that everyone be a prophet? So while you're explaining the scene, Elliot, it occurs to me that the problem from Moses's point of view is not a problem of leadership, that he's incapable as a leader, but that the people do not have enough access to God because Moses is limited as a human being. Now that there are so many other people with the Spirit of God, it's a blessing for the people. And, I've been reading a lot of biblical criticism lately, and I'm struck by the line that's going to come up in the last chapter of the Parsha this week, that Moses was the most modest of people. And that's really a comment on his response here, I think. That another person might say, I need help myself. I don't need you to give other people my job. But Moses says, if I can't do this and God could allow other people to do this, then that's great, because that makes it easier for me and it's better for everyone.
Well, even I would even go in a slightly different angle, but in the same general direction. Yes, we do know that Moses needs some help, and he does ask for this help. But there's a reorientation towards what the whole point of Mosaic leadership is, right? Like, so Moses' leadership, um, what is it you're trying to do to these people? You're trying to just get them from, Egypt to Gilgal? Are you just trying to physically move them? Because that's, then you need, Dwight Eisenhower or George Marshall to plan out all the steps in this long military campaign. Are you actually trying to teach people a religious orientation to the world, to make the divine voice audible, to bring them to Sinai and hear Torah? And 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 what did they do back then, at Sinai? They ran away. The voice was so loud, the people ran away. And Moses said, no, 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 don't run away. God is just wanting to know if you're going to have this kind of level of awe for the rest of time. And they don't successfully keep that up. But when Eldad and Medad hit this ecstasy, you could imagine a human leader, we made a Donald Trump joke before, so I'll make one now. I alone can fix this. This is about me and my leadership. And Moses says, okay, by the way, you know why I'm doing my job, right? It's so that prophecy will spread through all the people, and all the people will have access to the divine. So mi ten kolam Adonai nevi'im ki ten Adonai et rucho alehem. Would that all the people of God were prophets, as God puts the divine spirit upon them. That's the point. And so the human, Joshua says, your poll numbers aren't going to be as good after this. He said, I don't care. The point is that Eldad and Medad and you and me and everybody else gets the divine spirit.
Just as we're talking about this, I'm reminded of, one theory of rabbinic leadership, which is to make rabbis obsolete, which is to say to and I don't want to use the word because it's overused, but empower people, to empower everyone to do it themselves, and in that way they won't need this. But obviously the tension of this is that you always need a leader and you always need a teacher. Even teachers need teachers, and leaders need people that they can consult with and be advised by, that don't lead them, but they don't do it in a vacuum. You can't have a functioning group without some kind of leadership. Otherwise, it just kind of becomes impossible. You see what happens with leaderless movements, right?
I used to think about that obsolete thing.
Yeah,
I used to think, and after 20 plus years of working in a shul which has a high degree of lay leadership, I of course, I have some self-interest in this question, but I don't think that's. I agree with where you're heading.
yeah.
You want to involve people. What you want is not to be leaderless. Ultimately, you're not heading for an anarchist collective, because that probably is not going to get that successful. I do think that the rabbinic leadership, intellectual leadership, spiritual leadership, musical leadership, football teams and basketball teams and whatever, you do need leaders who will point people to things that they didn't know that they wanted, that they didn't know that they could aspire to, make them think and make them reflect and give them tools. But what you can't do is like not involve them. The whole point is actually to involve somebody in the team, involve somebody in the process. And so what I would like to hear, what I would like to interpret Moshe as saying is, the point is not that you all, do what I say and follow me because I'm saying it, but that I will teach you things that will enable you to be your best selves.
Yeah. It's just so we have a couple of minutes to explore the scene at the end, which is a scene of, I'm going to just say it seems like just rank jealousy, where Miriam and Aaron complain among themselves. They're talking, and it says basically that well, let's see. But to the Miriam Aaron, they talk about his wife for a second. We're not going to talk about that. Rak b'Moshe diber Adonai. Does God only speak to Moses? Alo gam banu diber vayishma Adonai. He speaks to us also. And I see that as a moment of unbelievable candor, honesty, and just, jealousy. He's got the relationship.
So when you say that, Elliot, what are you saying? That they are saying, Miriam and Aaron, that they want God to speak to them more?
No, that they want. I would think that the interpretation we're putting out here is they're upset that they're clearly number 2 and 3. Like everybody knows that's true. Everybody knows that God speaks to Aaron any number of times, and everybody remembers that Miriam was the great singer at the sea. But they're clearly not the leaders, the boss leaders.
And that's what they
Aaron is the Kohen Gadol, for crying out loud, and he's just kind of jealous that he's not Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah,
it must be hard to be Moshe
I do
Rabbeinu's
think this is a moment where they're putting their feelings right in front of us. They're saying he's got this relationship and we don't. And I mean, at a certain point, that we all have to come to terms with the fact that we are who we are, and we only have so much talent. We only have so much intellectual capacity. I remember years ago when the seminary put out these high holiday ads, right? And there was something to the tune of like, not everybody's Michael Jordan. Not everyone can throw a ball in a basket. You can't think of yourself as being, but you can certainly be the best of who you are, and you can make yourself into a more perfect version of yourself.
It's a Zeusia story.
Yeah, no. So the point, I think, is, they, for a moment, they're imagining themselves as if they were Moses and as if they could have that relationship. And it's the jealousy of that relationship that really corrodes them, I think. Rather than say, look, I admire him. Look at that. And there is an element of sacrifice there. There's an element of worthiness there. There's an element of unapproachability there. We're not him. And
So
yeah.
Yeah, what I wanted to add, so just a little piece about the previous part of the conversation. Moses is not becoming obsolete. His leadership is augmented. And I think that's an important point, because when we look at the story in chapter 12 with Miriam, Aaron, and Moshe, everyone has a role. And Aaron and Miriam don't understand their role. Their role is that God speaks to them occasionally, and then they respond. Moses's role is that God speaks to him a lot, and he has to lead the people. And as we know, it's not a role necessarily that Moshe chose, but it's a role that only he can play. And it doesn't make him better, which Miriam and Aaron might think, but because he also has a role. And he has to play his role. And your role has nothing to do with his role, as God makes clear when he says, you've completely misunderstood. I throw you a few crumbs, shirayim, as it were, remnants from the Rebbe's challah. And Moses, he eats at my table.
It doesn't make him better, except it totally makes him better. It must be not easy to be Moshe Rabbeinu's brother. Like, there's a basketball player, an NBA basketball player, Seth Curry. He's Steph Curry's brother, and he's an NBA basketball player, and he's great. He's just Steph Curry's brother. Okay, it must be hard to be Steph Curry's brother. I'm sure it was hard to be Moses, between Aaron and Miriam. But I wanted to just pick up on one thing. Elliot said we would skip over, and we will skip over the story talks about he married an Ethiopian woman. So American Jews are almost, inevitably, we're going to talk about this as a racial story, although that's not how classical people mostly read it, as a thing about, he married this black woman. What could this be? No, actually, most people read it the other way, which is to say that Moses and Miriam speak al odot hakushit which means on behalf of the Cushite woman that Moses married. And Barry said, it speaks to Moses, Aaron and Miriam on an occasional basis, Moses all the time. So a classical way of reading this story, which is replicated in the Rashi, is that Moses, because he always had to be ready to work with God, he was God's, so to speak, right-hand man all the time, was celibate. And when Aaron and Miriam spoke al odot hakushit, they were speaking on behalf of the Cushite woman that he married. This poor woman has got a celibate husband. That wasn't fair. That wasn't part of the deal. He should also have to live normal family life. And so there's something perhaps sweet about the complaint. I basically think this is about jealousy. I basically think that this is about how hard it is to be, the stars sibling, even for the greatness of their own role, and Aaron being Cohen Gadol, for crying out loud. But I also think it's interesting, given that we're just a week away from reading about this past week, read the Sota, about the
suspected adulteress.
the trial by ordeal of the suspected adulteress driven by an insanely jealous husband. And we read about the Nazir who just like completely goes off and takes these extreme religious vows. And in some sense, the Torah in both cases says, like, come on, can you just be normal? Be normal. And I could hear Aaron and Miriam saying at some level, can you just be normal? Can you be a husband and a father? And you don't have to be in your job 100% of the time.
It's fascinating. It leaves us with so many, questions, and just, I think it sets us up for what's going to be the crisis, which is next week, which is the episodes of the spies and how that's going to change everything. Well, we've reached the end of our time together. Again, we want to thank people watching and people listening. It's so great that you're with us, and we really, really enjoy your comments, and we really value the fact that you have chosen to spend this time with us, and we look forward again next week to this crisis, the crisis moment in the desert stories. In the meantime, I want to say to everyone, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. And we'll see you next week. I'll be back in North America next week. See you next week. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.